Your story time's going to be with me, and we're going to read George's Marvellous Medicine by Roald Dahl. In the front of this book, it introduces all the characters that we're going to meet in the story. So if you have a look there, you'll be able to see them. You've got George Cranky, Mr. Cranky, Mrs. Cranky, and Grandma. Chapter 1 is called Grandma. So I think we're going to meet her first. Let's have a look. Are we ready? I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning. So be a good boy and don't get into any mischief. This was a silly thing to say to such a young boy. At any time, it immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, his mother said. Then she went out, closing the door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in the chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, "Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine." "No, Grandma." "No," said George. "And just try and behave yourself for once while she's away." "Yes, Grandma," said George. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or a sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere. So there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at the pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. "You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start," Grandma said to George. "That'll keep you out of mischief for a few minutes." "Yes, Grandma," said George. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was selfish, a grumpy old lady. She was pale and had brown teeth and small puckered up mouth like a dog's bottom. It's a bit rude. "One spoon," she said. "No milk." Most grandmas are lovely, kind, helpful ladies, but not this one. She spent all day and every day sitting in her chair by the window, and she was always complaining, grousing, grouching, grumbling, griping about something or other. Never once, even on her best days, had she smiled at George and said, "Well, how are you this morning, George?" Or, "Why don't you have a game of snakes and ladders?" Or, "How was school today?" She didn't seem to care about other people, only about herself. She was a miserable old grouch. George went into the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. "Ew, it's not sweet enough," she said. "Put more sugar in." George took the cup back to the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully to his grandma. "Where's the saucer?" she said. "I don't have a cup without a saucer." George fetched her saucer. "And what about a teaspoon, if you please?" "I've stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it well." "I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much." "Fetch me the spoon." George fetched her the teaspoon. When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when him and her were on their own that she began treating him badly. "You know what's the matter with you?" the old woman said, staring at George over the rim of her teacup with those bright, wicked little eyes. "You're growing too fast. Boys who grow fast become lazy and stupid." "But I can't help it if I'm growing fast, Grandma," said George. "Of course you can," she snapped. "Growing's a nasty, childish habit." "But we have to grow, Grandma. If we didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups." "Rubbish, boy, rubbish," she said. "Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not." "But you did once, Grandma." "Only a very little," the old woman answered. "I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with all those other nasty childish habits like laziness, disobedience, greed, sloppiness, untidiness, stupidity. You haven't given any of these up, have you?" "I'm still only a little boy, Grandma." "You're 8 years old," she snorted. That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it will soon be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? It's ridiculous, she went on. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a look at his grandma. She was certainly a very tiny person. Her legs were so short she had a footstool to put her feet on, and her head only came halfway up the back of the armchair. Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall, said George. Don't listen to your daddy, Grandma said. Listen to me. But how do I stop myself growing? Asked George. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow the wrong way, she snapped. Up! Instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her. Never grow up, she said. Always down. Yes, Grandma. And stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Oh, no, I don't like cabbage, said George. It's not what you like or what you don't like, Grandma snapped. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage. And it's got to be caterpillars in it too. So it's much better for you. Ouch, George said. Caterpillars? Caterpillars give you brains, the old woman said. Mummy washes them down the sink, George said. Mummy's stupid as you are, Grandma said. Cabbage doesn't taste anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs too. Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. Whatever I see a slug on a piece of lettuce, Grandma said, I gobble it up quick before it crawls away. Delicious, she said. Oh, that's really disgusting. I hope you don't eat slugs and caterpillars. My grandma doesn't. She squeezed her lips together tight so that her mouth became a tiny wrinkled hole. Can you all do that? Make a tiny wrinkled hole like Grandma. Delicious, she said again. Worms, slugs, beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you. You're joking, Grandma. I never joke, she said. Beetles, perhaps. Best of all, they go crunch. Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a beetle inside the stem of a stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? You'll find all sorts of nice things in sticks of raw celery, the old woman went on. Sometimes earwigs. I don't want to hear about it, said George. A big fat earwig is very tasty, Grandma said, licking her lips. But you've got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its end, and it grabs your tongue with those. It will never let go. So you've got to bite the earwig first. Chop, chop, chop before it bites you. George started edging towards the door. He wanted to get away as fast as he could from this filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She said, pointing her finger straight at George's face. You're trying to get away. Little George stood by the door staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back at him. Could it be, George wondered? What if she was, a witch? He had always thought witches were only in fairy tales, but now he knows not. Was this sure or not? Oh dear. Come closer to me, little boy, she said, beckoning him with her horny finger to come closer. And I will tell you secrets. George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. I know great many secrets, she said, and suddenly she smiled. It was a thin, icy smile, the kind a snake might make just before it bites you. Come over here to Grandma, and she'll whisper secrets to you. George took a step backwards, edging closer to the door. You mustn't be frightened of your old Grandma, she said, smiling the icy smile. George took another step backwards. And look, there's George, and there's his Grandma. Oh, I wonder if she is a witch. She does look scary, doesn't she? Let's find out. Some of us, she said. All at once. She was leaning forward in her chair, whispering in a throaty sort of voice to George he had never heard before. Some of us, she said, have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shapes. A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened. Some of us, the old woman went on, have fire on our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know the secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets. George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor. We know how to make nails drop off and your teeth to grow out your fingers instead. George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him most of all, the frosty smile and the brilliantly unblinking eyes. We know how to have you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you. Grandma, cried George, stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other. George made a dive for the door. It doesn't matter how far you run. Shaking a little. Oh, how he hated his grandma. He really hated that horrible old witchy woman. And all of a sudden he had a tremendous urge to do something about her. Something whopping. Something absolutely terrific. A real shocker. A sort of explosion. He wanted to blow away the witchy smell that hung about her in the next room. He may have been only 8 years old, but he was a brave little boy. He was ready to take this old woman on. I'm not going to be frightened by her, he said. But he was frightened, and that's why he wanted to suddenly explode her away. Well, not quite away, but he did want to shake the old woman up a bit. Very well, then. What shall it be? This whopping, terrific, exploding shocker for Grandma. He would have liked to have put a firework banger under her chair, but he didn't have one. He would have liked to put a long green snake down the back of her dress, but he didn't have a long green snake. And there he is, look, thinking of all his terrible, terrific ideas of what he could do to his grandma. Can you think of any ideas? Any tricks he could play on her? He would have liked to put 6 black rats in a room with her and lock the door, but he didn't have 6 black rats. As George sat there pondering this interesting problem, his eyes fell upon a bottle of Grandma's brown medicine, standing on the sideboard. Rotten stuff, it seemed to be. 4 times a day, a large spoonful of it was shovelled into her mouth, and it didn't do her the slightest bit of good. She was always just as horrid after as she had been before. The whole point of the medicine surely was to make a person better, and if it didn't do that, then it was quite useless. "Aha!" thought George suddenly. "Aha! I know exactly what I'll do. I shall make her a new medicine." Oh, he's going to make her a medicine. I think this must be George's marvellous medicine. Where are we? Oh, Miss Boulder's off their place. When that is strong enough and so fierce and fantastic that it will either cure her completely or it will blow the top off her head. I'll make her magic medicine, a medicine no doctor in the world has ever made before. George looked at the kitchen clock. It said 10:05. There was nearly an hour left before Grandma's next dose was due at 11. Here we go then, cried George, jumping from the table. A magic medicine it shall be. Right, so what's he going to put in? Let's have a look. So give me a bug of a jumping flea, give me 2 snails and lizards 3, a slimy squiggler from the sea, a poisonous sting of a bumblebee, and the juice from a fruit of a jube tree, and the powdered bone of a wombat knee, and 100 other things as well, each with a rather nasty smell. I'll stir them, I'll boil them, long, a mixture tough, a mixture strong. And then hi-ho, and down it goes, a nice big spoonful. Hold your nose. Just gulp it down and have no fear. How do you like it, Granny dear? Will she go pop? Will she explode? Will she go flying down the road? Start fizzing like a Coke can? Who knows? Not I. Let's wait and see. I'm glad it's neither nor you or me. Oh, Grandma, if you only knew what I've got in store for you. And that's the end of chapter 2. So, tomorrow we'll find out what happens when Grandma takes the medicine. Will she explode? Will she shoot off down the road? Who knows? Maybe you could think about a marvellous medicine that you could make for somebody. What would you put inside?